Well, today has been manic, and in this video we're going to go through everything from start to finish, whether that be the setup to the bait application to casting, you name it, we go through it. It's been great fun. Well, first up, let's talk about the actual setups that I'm using. Both of these rods with me are dedicated surface fishing rods. It doesn't matter if you don't have one of these, you can use any old carp rod, but you will find using a lighter actual rod or something that's dedicated to surface fishing will help you in a number of ways, because they still cast the weights decent distances, but they're typically designed with a bit of a softer tip, so it takes those lunges, because you're using usually much thinner or weaker diameter hook lengths, so you don't want to be having something that's too rigid and will bump the fish off, especially when it's getting towards the net. So that's why I tend to opt for dedicated floater rods. Reels, again, it doesn't really matter what reel you go for, just something that's balanced with the setup. Both of these are pretty small reels I'm using today, and they're both loaded up with dedicated surface line. Now that's important as well, because you don't want your line to be sinking. Any line that sinks, one, draws your float back towards you, which you don't want it to do, but it's also getting in the fish's way. If they're feeding up in the surface layers and they're touching your line, it just alerts them to your presence much more than, I know, a massive white float and that. But the more line you can have on the surface, the better. Then we move down to the actual Hooklink material. Now this is also a dedicated surface fishing line, but tend to go ever so slightly weaker than my main line for two reasons. That's the bit that you really don't want to spook the fish with, but also you'll find that if you go for a weaker Hooklink, if you had any issues, at least that's what's going to break before anything else. So if you do, in the unfortunate event, crack off or anything, yes, the floats will all come off by themselves. If you have a slightly weaker Hooklink material, it should still be even safer than if everything else broke off. That's just one of the reasons, but mainly because the thinner diameter for warier fish is perfect to be used when surface fishing. That is the dedicated setup. But now, let's look a little bit closer at the float and rig section. Now these are the two floats that I'm using today, and they're both completely different, and it shows it doesn't really matter what you go for, it's down to personal preference, but they also are serving different purposes today. The smaller one, this little Fox bolt bubble I think it is, that's for shorter range work, because some of the fish have been coming in quite close, and I don't want to be casting this big boy right on top of their heads when they're close rim, but some of the fish have been showing further out, and that's where the bigger controller comes in. This is probably just a bit too heavy for this sort of rod, but it is getting me much further than this one with a lot more ease. That was a goose pecking my reel, apologies for that. So those are the two floats I'm using today to cast out, and different distance wise. But you also find these hook fish pretty much in exactly the same way. They work on, yes, a bit of a weight basis, but also it's water resistant. So when a fish tries to pull this way, you'll find that the bigger surface area or the fatter end of these is what hits the water first, and it has pretty much exactly the same effect as what a ledgering system would do on the bottom. You can still strike fish, but I find if you let these things do their job, you tend not to pull out a fish as often, because I can get very impatient when I'm surface fishing. If I see a fish slurp at my hook bait, sometimes I can pull a bit too soon and I pull out of the fish's mouth. So you're letting these do their job normally means I land a few more fish. Now let's have a look at the hook bait. Now when it comes to the business end, I try to keep it as simple as possible. That is tied on with a simple hair rig, but I've actually whipped 7 whippings down the shank, then kick the hair out, then whip down again, and that means that the hook bait sits perfectly up above the hook and kicks out at a nice angle. That bait always sits at a nice positioning. I've then used a little bit of tubing. Now this is, I think, the Ziggerliner tubing from Nash, just a tiny bit of that to make sure that the exit point from the eye is nice and straight. I want that gate to be as open as possible, so when that's sitting on the surface, the line goes straight across from the hook, giving me the best hooking potential on this setup. Hook bait wise, this is just a whittled down super buoyant pop-up, but you can use match the hatch with dog biscuits or artificial ones, whatever your personal preference is. Sometimes bright works, sometimes match the hatch works, that's down to you, but that is as simple as it comes. Now when it comes to the actual hook length, that can also make a big difference. Now hook length can have a massive impact on your catch rate on each individual session. Sometimes you find that short hook length works, other times you find a longer hook length works. There's a couple of reasons for why each seem to work on different occasions. I tend to start with quite a long hook length. As you can see, that's almost my wingspan, which is probably a good 4.5, 5 foot I think this is. So it's quite a long hook length, and the reason for that is because if the fish are quite finicky, I don't want them to be too disturbed by the float. They might be more inclined to take a hook bait which is further away from this foreign object that's out there. Now there's a few downsides to using a slightly longer hook length. Of course, that's not going to have the bolt effect from that float. If that line is sort of bunched up and looped like this and that fish takes it, as you can see, it's got a lot of movement until it feels the weight from that float. So if I was going to a shorter hook length, obviously you're going to feel the impact of that float a lot quicker and you're more likely to hook the fish. Now you can use a shorter hook length. Normally when the fish starting to get really aggressively feeding, they're competing against each other, you may find a lot of the time they actually get really inquisitive of the float. If they're starting to do that, nosing the float, mouthing at the float, clearly they're not fussed about it, so you can probably shorten your hook length. But if you are finding, like I said, that they're avoiding this like the plague, that's when a longer hook length will probably come into action. So if you're someone that's fished on the surface, they're all over and you think, why aren't I getting a bite? And it's because you're using a shorter hook length, maybe just go a little bit longer, and that might be the difference between not catching those fish and actually catching those fish. There's a lot of trial and error involved in it though. And when it comes to the free offerings, the bait that we're putting around to try and get these fish feeding competitively, there are loads of different options on the market, but of course you can't beat trusty old mixers, which are probably the cheapest option, and they just seem to always work. But there's a few things I like to do just to add the attraction to this and help me when actually fishing out on the water, because sometimes you get a bit of chop on the water, it's hard to see your hook bait, hard to see where the fish are feeding. So that's where I introduce a little bit of oil. Now this is actually just chili infused olive oil. Probably not the cheapest oil out there, and there's probably lots of alternatives, but I used this years and years ago and it worked really, really well to slick up the water. This is an infinite lid, what is going on? There we go. And I used this a few years ago and it just worked really well, and I think the chili, whether that makes any difference, I have no idea, but it just seemed to work for me. So I just put some of this on those baits, and what you do is just give them a good old coating. I might just leak some on the floor. Probably use this whole bottle because I want to really slick up that water. It's not too bad today. Probably shouldn't talk whilst I'm mixing it. It's not too bad today, but every now and then the wind picks up and it is difficult to see. So there we go, they're now coated. I don't want to leave it on there too long before I start putting it out, because I want that to then sit on the water, flatten it off, and you'll be able to see a lot easier where your hook bait is and where the fish are feeding. Now it's time to get some out, and the hardest part about surface fishing is being patient, not getting the rod out straight away when you see some fish starting to come up. Put some bait out, get them feeding competitively, then we can start thinking about putting the hook link out. Not that I've done that today, I've already caught two. Do as I say, not as I do. Now before you put any bait out, it's worth using the setup that you're going to be fishing with for the day and checking just how far you can cast with. There's no point baiting up, getting them feeding competitively, then thinking, I can't reach it with my float. So I baited up at a distance which I know I can reach today, nice, comfortable. Even if the wind picked up or something, I know I'll still be able to fish right there. So I'm going to start putting some bait out, and hopefully they'll start feeding competitively. And once that happens, I can get the actual hook bait out, because a competitive feeding fish, and lots of competitive feeding fish, are a lot easier to catch than one or two really finicky taking the odd mixer here and there. You will catch them if you persevere, but you find getting them feeding on freebies with no sense of danger whatsoever will make it a lot easier when you do eventually put the bait out. There's already some taken, and this is where the patience thing comes in, because I'm itching to get a rod out there already, because I feel like I catch, but from experience, if you do that, you'll often find that they start to spook off. It takes a while to get them to come back feeding again. So that's 3 healthy sized spods out there now. Quite a lot of dog biscuits from what I can see. And I'm just going to sit and watch and wait. Now this is the bit I struggle with. I can see some fish are starting to feed, but I've got to wait because there's a lot of mixes out there, so the odds of them taking mine are pretty slim still. And I can actually see some bow waves of fish coming into the area, because once some start competitively feeding and slurping away, that makes the noise that makes others think, hold on, there's something going on somewhere. They're feeding, I want to get involved in that. See some boshing far back, another one taking mixers. So this is a good start. It means that the plan is going to work. I can see that oil is making the slick, and those mixers are slowly spreading out. And we just wait until we see a good dozen, I reckon, feeding before I put a rod out. I've got a few feeding out there now. I put more rod out. Cast well beyond them, so I don't land on their heads, doesn't spook them. And also I think if this old float landed on a carp's head, it would go straight through it. It's a big old float, this one. Bring it back into the mix of where they are. Don't know if you can hear them slurping on the mic, but there's quite a few that have gone to the right where they've drifted. And that's another good thing about having the 2 setups. I know not everyone can do that, but I could probably, if I wanted, cast the light. In fact, I'm going to grab the other rod and whip this one to the right where there's some feeding. This one looks very likely to go off. There's one right on it, coming straight for it. Set the clutch. Go on, I can see my white pop up right behind. Surely any second. He's right on it. Go on. Go on. One more, surely. Go on. I got proper mugged off. 8. It's worth putting that one out. So putting one rod to the side where some of the mixes had drifted has paid off, because that's gone off before the main spot has. That rod's still out, so there's every chance of a double hook up here because there's fish still feeding on that left one. Hopefully I get this one in before that happens, because that could become interesting. And that's why I was talking about having a dedicated floater rod, because this fish is going mental before the net. This is where hook holds are under the most strain, but without jinxing it, this one's about to slip in the net, and this will be fish number 3. Another little common, and he's in. Oh, sweet. Nothing big, but always welcome. It's another typical little shearwater common. Determined to soak me and not let me hold him for the camera. There's some closer in. Whackling down. There we are, 2 rods fishing. Here we go. This is the right hand rod that's gone again. And it's right in amongst where my left rod is. Away, there we go. I'm really cautiously keeping an eye on my left rod. There's fish all over that float. So it could go any second as well. I love surface fishing so much, I've missed this. And that is number 4. Oof. Well, I think it's no coincidence that I've had 4 bites on a imitation hook bait and a shorter hook link. So I've now switched this one over to the same. See if that makes a difference, because this has had fish feeding all over it, but it's not gone off. And that's part of surface fishing, seeing what's working on the day. And I know not everyone's going to be able to try and use 2 separate rods doing the same thing, but I've now seen firsthand that one tactic is working against the other. So now this is on the same, theoretically I should get some pickups on this one as well, because it's what they seem to be preferring on the other rod. And it's not that far apart. The bites have been on the kind of off the spot where the bait's been drifting, so never ignore the biscuits that have drifted off of your actual spot, because often there'll be fish picking off the odd one with no danger whatsoever, and they'll be quite easy to catch if you just let it drift round and sit next to them. So that is now out in the mix. I'm going to redo the right hand rod, which is off the spot but still surrounded by the odd fish feeding, and see if we can get a few more, because that's 4 bites in rather quick succession. So I'm sure if we keep at it, we'll be able to have several more. Oh, the other one's gone. So once again, bite number 5 is on the odd mixers which have drifted to the right. So I'm going to have to stop calling this the off the spot rod and maybe the actual spot rod, because that's 5 bites of 5 coming from where the bait isn't being introduced. Fish in the net, bait going out. With a few fish under my belt and the basics covered, I did take my foot off the pedal a little bit when it came to the filming side of things, just to simply enjoy my afternoon's fishing. I did get chatted to various other subscribers and anglers, one of which you can see right here, who has helped me out bringing a spod rod back in whilst I'd hooked a fish. And it's always nice chatting face to face with subscribers, so I'd like to say thank you in person for the support that I'm given online. If you don't follow me yet or subscribe, now's your chance. Hit that button below, it's free and it helps the channel to grow. Really do appreciate every single one of you that subscribe to me, whether it be from right now or from many, many years. And you may also be thinking, I've seen you catch loads of fish in this session, but you haven't actually lifted a single one to the camera. Well, you're about to see exactly why I've not got a single fish out of the water.
This is why I haven't shown you any of the fish I've caught today. A wet sock and a little common that doesn't want to be held. There we go, really quickly, hold it like a numpty. Back it goes. Ah.
Well, I've now resorted to just firing out my float and single hook bait because I'm completely out of free offerings. I've got another bag of dog biscuit in the van, but I think that would be pushing it, considering I said to Mario I'd catch 10 fish and come home. I've now caught just got those again. I've now caught 11 fish and I'm holding out for fish number 12. So I am being selfish. I'm pushing it a bit long, but that's the thing with surface fishing. When it's going like this, it's so moreish. You just keep on going, and before you know it, you've been stood for hours on end, like I have been. You're a little bit pink because it's the first bit of decent sun we've had in a long time. These noises are, I promise, fishing noises and nothing else. And it's just been a purely enjoyable day. So I hope you've taken something from this video, whether that be how I present my hook baits. I haven't gone really intricate in detail on how to tie things up and things like that. It's just been the fundamentals from all the way from the setup I'm using through to the bait I'm using, bait application, and then casting over the top and bringing it back, and the whole learning what the fish are doing and trying to change your approach to make it work, that you start catching them in the end. The fish have completely gone. I'm sure if I put another spot out there now, they'd be back. It's just the odd one lingering around and taking the odd bit from the surface, which isn't even bait anymore. I think it's like bits of leaves and stuff that are hitting on the lake. So my hook bait's the only thing out there that really resembles a dog biscuit now. Is it going to take it? No, I've been nosed a couple of times. That hook has seen better days. So I think I am going to have to haul it a day there. So cheers for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and remember, please like the video if you did, subscribe if you haven't already, because it really does help the channel grow and helps me to know that you like this sort of content. Oh, it's got nosed again. Again, I'm talking fishing. I've made that weird. I'll see you in the next one. It's too hot.